Welcome to the Happy Dog Podcast. This podcast is designed to bring you ideas and uplifting information to help you live a meaningful and fulfilled life with your dog from a holistic perspective. Now, let's explore the world of a happy dog. Welcome to episode 3 of the Happy Dog Podcast. Today we have a really awesome guest whose work I've admired for a while. Dr. Francisco Maia, who's the owner of the Canine PT here in Chicago. Hello, and how are you doing?
Hey, Alicia. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for being on the podcast. And so let's dive into your background a little bit. You were born and raised in Brazil, and you moved to the United States in 2005, graduated with a bachelor's degree in exercise science from Indiana University in 2009, and then in 2012, you got your doctor of physical therapy degree from the University of Pittsburgh. You worked for a while in orthopedics and sports medicine rehabilitation, and then you decided to switch to working with animals. So what made you make that switch?
That's a great question because I do get asked that quite a bit from clients, from other physical therapists who find me on social media and everything. But it was one of those things where I always knew I wanted to be a physical therapist ever since I was about 14 years old or so. But I grew up playing sports, so I thought naturally that the area that I wanted to work with was the area of sports medicine. And I did enjoy working with that population, but I wasn't I realized after a couple of years working in that field that I wasn't super passionate about it as I thought I would be. So back in 2014, I was just researching and keeping my eyes open for different areas of physical therapy that I could get involved, because that's one of the coolest things about being a physical therapist is that you can specialize in different areas. And that was when at that point I first heard of canine rehab. Up until that point, I had no idea that we as physical therapists could get certified to work with animals. And as soon as I heard that, I went home. I started researching everything online that I could find. And then I told my wife about it. And we knew pretty much right away that that was what I was meant to be doing. So all throughout 2014, I went through the whole certification and finished that up in 2015 and have been working with animals since then.
That's awesome. And we'll get to talking about some of your dogs later, but did you, at this point when you were realizing that you really wanted to work with animals, did you have dogs, or what was your experience?
So I did have a dog growing up, like a little toy poodle. He lived to be probably about 16 years old. I can't remember exactly, but we got him when I was about 3 years old. And he passed away shortly before I moved to the United States. So I must have been about 19. But I was never actually sometimes there are those kids that grow up oh, I want to be a vet, I want to work with animals. I love my dog. We had so much fun together. He was a great soccer player. We used to play soccer in the yard all day, running around. He was phenomenal. But I never considered a career with animals. And then in 2014, when I first heard of working with animals, me and my wife, we had already adopted Ringo, a sheepdog, who we adopted from the Western Pennsylvania Humane Society back in April of 2010. So we had already had him for 3.5 years with us and really developed a bond. And it was a different kind of bond at that point compared to having a childhood dog, because, this was the dog like Ringo that I really cared for, that I was in charge of, that I took on walks every day. So we developed that bond that's when I knew that maybe working with dogs would be something that I'll be a lot more passionate about.
Got it. Yeah, definitely makes sense. I feel like that's kind of what happened to me when I knew I wanted to work with animals, but then when I got my first and own dog, it was like then on overdrive. So,
It just, yeah, for whatever reason, it just kind of like changes like the way we look at things a little bit when we
exactly.
become dog parents ourselves.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so you have a really extensive background, already, but then you went ahead and completed your training at the Canine Rehabilitation Institute to become certified in canine rehab as a therapist. Why is it so important to work with someone who's had this specific training and has been trained as an animal physical therapist instead of just kind of coming from the human side and winging it in the animal world?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question because it can get very confusing for the general public,
Mm-hmm.
especially as the field of canine rehab is getting super popular. For you to be sure that you're working with someone like qualified and trained in the field. Nowadays, there's no specific degree in canine rehab or physical therapy, so it's not like one of us could go to a college or university and graduate with a degree, with a diploma as a canine physical therapist. So what happens is that physical therapists and veterinarians can go through the same certification courses, which currently there are two main places in the United States that offer those certification courses to get certified to work with animals. So you see a little bit of a mix of both. You see some people working in this field who used to be human physical therapists and got trained to work with canines, to work with animals and made that transition. And you also have veterinarians who were doing primary care vet and so forth and went through whole vet school and then went through the same training, the same certification process to work in the canine rehab realm. So as long as you're working with one of those folks, as long as the treatment plan is being supervised by a canine physical therapist or by a rehab veterinarian, that's when you know that you're working with someone qualified to be working in this field.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know it is kind of confusing, but when you explain it like that, it makes it much easier to understand. um,
Yeah.
and so, how long did it take you to go through your training at the Canine Rehabilitation Institute?
Yeah, so it's an extensive training. It's not just a weekend course.
Mm-hmm.
It is about 200 hours total, including some online lectures, a lot of labs in person where you get to practice hands-on techniques, hands-on treatments, and everything. And then it also ends with a 40-hour internship at a clinic already doing rehab, and there are different sites all over the United States that you can go for it. They're affiliated with the Canine Rehab Institute, but when you add it up all together, it's about 200 hours. So it did take me about 14 months to
Mm,
go through the whole thing, to have the time to travel, to take the courses, and have the time to take time off work that I had at that point. And, because I was using pretty much my own paid vacation time to go through this, so I had to kind of like get around that as well and make sure that that he worked with everyone's schedule. So that was a little bit challenging, but I think on average it probably takes people about like 6 to 9 months or so, depending on how your schedule opens up and you can attend those courses and everything. But
got
it
it.
took me about 14 months to go and complete the whole process.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So, I mean, either way, it sounds in depth. 9 months is a long time on the short end of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's just also, just like with any training, that's just the beginning, right? I mean,
Right.
that gives us the ability to kind of have the basic knowledge to get things started, but it's just a continuous learning process of learning new things, trying things, see what works, with our patients and so forth.
Of course. Definitely. That makes sense. And so, with your business, the Canine PT, you specialize in helping senior dogs to improve their independence with daily activities, and you want them to live out their golden years without the need for pain medication. And obviously, I love that. So, because I'm someone who's, advocating for improving dogs' lives from a holistic perspective, how does the work you're doing with your business that you started focus on the whole dog during the senior life stage?
Yeah, like physical therapy in general and canine rehab, I use the terms a little bit interchangeably, but as it becomes more popular, more veterinarians, more veterinary surgeons, and people are kind of like becoming aware of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
But truth be told, is that a lot of people still don't even know that what we do exists.
Mm.
It's amazing. Sometimes I'll meet folks and they're like, "Oh my God, I never thought that there would be physical therapy for dogs." But
Yeah.
they're like, it makes sense. And a lot of people, even the ones that do know that exists, it's still they don't really understand like the benefits that could come out of it. And most people associate physical therapy with something that you get after surgery, right? So if a dog in
Right.
this case has a knee surgery or a hip surgery, back surgery, whatever it may be, rehabilitation afterwards would be beneficial to get them back in shape. And that's completely true. But the reason why I have chosen to specialize in work with senior dogs, and let me be clear, I love working with every dog. But the
Of
reason why
course.
I do, the reason why I do the work and a lot of my outreach campaigns for senior dogs is because I feel like that's a subset of the canine population that get tremendous benefit from what we do, but still those benefits are not very well known by
Mm.
pet parents and also by the veterinary community as well. So that's why I chose to do a lot of outreach, a lot of educational things, teaching them that as the dogs start to age, yes, it is a normal aging process, but it doesn't mean that there is nothing we can do about it, because there is. And those are the dogs that respond super well within usually just a couple sessions. You
Mm.
already see them like feeling and moving a lot better. And that's why I love working with that population, is because we're able to get them going again. We're able to get them going on longer walks. We're able to get them jumping up on furniture again. We're able to just kind of like give them back, give their pet parents back a little bit of the things that they used to be able to do, but they haven't been doing lately because of physical limitations. And we're able to give that back to them. And that's kind of like the whole reason why, I got into the specializing with the senior dog
Mm-hmm.
population.
Well, and physical mobility has such an impact on the human aspect of it. Like when you have a dog that isn't physically mobile or slowing down or maybe in pain, like it really mentally messes with you as the human. And so I feel like
Mm-hmm.
you're not only providing something that gives the dog more strength and gives like their confidence back in a lot of ways, but you're doing that for the humans in a lot of
It
ways
is.
too.
Mm-hmm. It
So
really
it's
is.
focusing on, yes, how can I get this dog back to its wholesome, self in a way, but how can I make sure that like the human's feeling better about it too? But it's that's really interesting and really cool at the same time.
Yeah, no, you're completely right, because, especially if someone has had that pet, for a long time, if it was a pet that they adopted or got at a young age, you develop a certain routine.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a routine with our pets, and it can get pretty upsetting for the pet parent when, let's say, they used to go on a 45-minute walk every morning, and that was their own time. There was a time maybe for the pet parent to kind of like forget everything that's going on with the world today and
Right.
just kind of like have a one-on-one time with their dog, just enjoy that moment. And then once that's kind of like taken away a little bit because of the loss of mobility, that does affect the pet parent as well. So that's a great point.
Right, of course. Yeah. And so you've written a lot of really great blog posts on your website about things like keeping senior dogs thriving and working on common canine conditions like arthritis. And so I read a couple of them, and one I thought was great called Keeping Them Cozy Home Environment Changes for Senior Dogs. And that, totally ties into just helping out around the house, like to make both your lives improve. I'll link the blog post into the show notes, but can you briefly tell people who are listening what some simple ways to help out senior dogs in the home might be?
Yeah, and those are things that a lot of times people don't even think about. And and a lot of the blog posts that I do, or a lot of the live videos I do on social media, once again, it comes about me educating, me having an outreach campaign to educate about senior dogs in general. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the major things I'm dealing with when I'm working with the client and with the patient is the fact that not only we need to get the patient feeling better, and let me clarify, when I say patient, that's the dog. When I say
Yes.
client, that's like the pet owner. But not only is getting the patient feeling better and moving better, but a lot of times it's also adapting the environment to make things easier for them, because things do get a little bit harder as they age, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, a common issue is slippery floors like hardwood and tile floors. And there's simple solutions that we can do to help the pet. So we can either change the surface. So it doesn't mean though that you have to completely renovate your house
Right.
or your apartment, but you can add like area rugs, you can add runners, or yoga mats work
Mm.
super well, where you can cover, especially the areas where the pets tend to hang around most during the day. You can cover those areas so they're not slipping and sliding around. It just gives them a confidence to move around a little bit better. And it avoids getting hurt as well, because
Right.
sometimes if they can get hurt, sometimes especially if they lay down and they're trying to get up and they can't get a good grip to get up from that laying down position, they can potentially get hurt during the process. So we definitely want to make sure that we're addressing that. The other thing as well is sometimes if the pet needs to be able to go up and down stairs multiple times a day, especially in places like Chicago, where a lot of people live maybe in the second or third floor, walk up and don't have an elevator.
Mm-hmm.
That can become an issue, especially if you have like a medium to large size dog that you can't just pick them up and carry them up and down. So there are, for example, harnesses that I recommend, that I work with my clients on getting and fitting that harness. So that way the harness is used as an assistant device for you to give a little boost for your pet, to help them get up the stairs, to help them jump onto the car, or sometimes jump into the bed at night or something like that. So those are like a little bit of the common things that we do by changing the home environment and changing the community environment too, with the harness, to just make things easier for them. We still want to keep them active. We never want to take away from them the ability for them to do something. So
Mm-hmm.
we never, like, if we can let them go up and down stairs with a little assistance, that's better for them than you just picking them up and carrying them up and down, because you're still keeping them active. You're still keeping them mobile by doing the stairs. And that's what we try to do. And that's also, it's the neat thing about me coming into this profession with my background as a physical therapist, because when I did used to do human physical therapy, that's a lot of what we did as well. There was a lot of, I worked a little bit as well with the geriatric population in humans doing home health. So I would go to people's homes and I would help change the environment, changing the
Oh.
place to make it easier for them to get around with their walkers and so forth, or with a cane. So a lot of that knowledge translates really well into this aspect of it as well.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. That's great. You probably go into people's houses and say, "Move this and put down this here." But
We
it
do.
probably
I do
helps a
make
lot. Yeah.
recommendations. Yeah.
That's
hmm
great. Well, and one more blog post I want to call out is called Canine Rehabilitation Putting the Fun in Functional. And I really love the first few sentences of it, so I'm going to read it real quick. But it says, if you spent any time around medical doctors, chances are you're familiar with what a medical diagnosis is. Getting the right one is oftentimes the first step in establishing a treatment plan to recover from an injury or illness. But when it comes to canine rehabilitation, the medical diagnosis is only one ingredient that goes into determining the appropriate treatment. And I love that because I think it's just so great how you look at the really big picture of it, and like you said, even with going into the home and looking at people's environments and saying, oh, this is how you can help elevate this for your dog or change that. And so, with that said, can you tell us why physical therapy is so key to like the overall health. We know that it can obviously help senior dogs or dogs in pain and things like that, but if there's just one ingredient going into a medical diagnosis, what else goes into your overall picture when treating a patient?
Yeah, I love that blog post as well. It is one of my favorites too. And the reason why I wrote that one was exactly to talk about the difference,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a big difference between a medical diagnosis and what I call a functional diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even the same medical diagnosis, just two different patients can have different complications, different ways that they're dealing with it. So I'm going to take, for example, what is a very common injury with dogs, which is a tear of the CCL
Mm-hmm.
ligament, which is the equivalent of the ACL ligament in dogs. And
Mm-hmm.
it is the most common orthopedic injury in dogs, especially with certain breeds. But a dog that has a CCL tear can present completely different than just another dog that has the same CCL tear. And that's going to be very dependent on the dog themselves, but also on their environment, on the way they have to maneuver throughout the day and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And when I'm doing an evaluation, like an initial evaluation with a new patient, that's what I'm really focusing on. I'm doing a variety of different functional assessments, watching them getting around, do some different movements with them, some different exercises, and then I can see how they're moving around. And not only I can see what they're doing correctly, but most importantly, I can see the different ways that they're compensating to get around,
Hmm.
right? So for example, if a dog is avoiding putting weight on one of the back legs because there is a tear on the CCL ligament, then what they're going to do is they're going to be shifting their weight to the front because they're going to be trying to avoid putting weight on the back legs. And then once they start putting more weight into their front limbs, the shoulders, the muscles around the shoulders starting getting tight,
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm treating a dog with a knee issue, I'm not just treating the knee, I'm also treating the different compensation that happens along the body because of the way they move around. And that's what I mean by looking at the functional diagnosis, is to not focus on the medical diagnosis, which is usually the diagnosis that you get from different diagnostic tests like
Yeah.
radiographs or MRI or CT scans. Those are all helpful, but what it really matters for me as a canine physical therapist is that patient's ability to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be able to assess that and also make a correlation with that with what are the goals that that particular client has for their pet, right? Because if, once again, just going back to the example of two different dogs with the same CCL tear within their knee, if your goal is to get your pet to be able to go on long runs with you again, the physical therapy plan that I'm going to go through with you is going to be different than if your goal is just for you to go on a regular walk every day with your pet, but then at
Right.
home
Yeah.
they just kind of like laying down most of the day. It's just different goals, so you need to take that into account as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really looking at the whole picture of everything going on
Yeah,
within the body. Yeah. That's great.
yeah, and I think at the end of that blog, I even talk about this, if I remember from the top of my head. But what I say is that there's no cookie cutter approach to canine rehab.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be able to find, certain like protocols online to recover from a knee surgery or from other sorts of injuries. But the reality is that you're much better off at least getting an assessment by a canine physical therapist who can kind of at least point out to you what specifically is going on with your dog and then work on developing an exercise program that fits, your dog and the goals that you have with your dog.
Definitely. Well, and I see so many alignments with a lot of the nutrition work that I do with dogs because it's very similar in the sense that, like, not every dog is so different. And when you take into consideration nutrition and like gut health, it affects, just like how you said, if you're working with the back knee, it's going to affect the shoulders and all these things. If you're working with the gut, it's going to affect behavior and even
Mhm.
everything down to like eyesight and ears and inflammation, you know? So
Mhm.
I I love that you're doing this work because it's so necessary, and it's so necessary for people like you who are well educated and well spoken to be out there talking about how every dog is different, and when you approach every dog differently and taking all these different, you know, equations of their life into consideration is when you have the best results. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of successes that way.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that's also very cool about working with dogs compared to when I used to work with humans is that variety, of
Mm-hmm.
how they're all different, and not that humans are the same,
Right.
but what I mean by that is that with humans, when I was treating humans, I could just tell you, hey, you're gonna do X, Y, and Z exercises, and this is how you do them, and that
Mm-hmm.
was it. But with dogs, I need to get, I need to build their trust first. I need
Right.
to kind of like use positive reinforcement. I use a lot of treats, positive reinforcement to get the dog to do what I want them to do. And once I can see that, hey, they're doing good with this exercise, then I'll teach, the pet parent, the client, okay, this is how you're going to do this exercise with them. And it does take some training sometimes, especially with some exercises being a little bit harder for the client to learn how to move their dog around, how to handle them with just a treat without forcing them into a certain position or anything.
Oh, I'm
Just
sure.
like yeah, just like we see kind of like for those who might be listening and involved with like agility
Mm-hmm.
dogs, that most of the time when a dog in agility misses a certain obstacle, it's rarely their fault. It's usually the handler's fault that gave the dog the wrong cue on what the dog should be doing. And it's the same thing when doing this exercise programs with the dog. You need to teach the client, how to handle the dog and the different cues and everything that the dog is giving back to them on how they're doing with that exercise.
Got it. Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's a process for sure with dogs, as we all know.
Hmm.
I'm sure patience is like the biggest thing too that comes into play.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, each dog is so very different. Some dogs, as soon as I walk into their home, they're very friendly. They're get excited. I give them treats and everything. And some dogs, it takes a couple sessions for them to get used to me. They're
Mm-hmm.
very weary at first, but eventually, pretty much, all of them gets to a point where they get excited to see me, and that's when we know that I was able to build that trust. Is when they see me walking up the driveway, or they hear me going up the steps in the condo, or they see me parking right in front of their place, and they already get excited of me being there, and that's so cool when that
Yeah,
happens.
that's awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about your own dog, Lieutenant Dan. And I know you have another dog
Yeah.
too, but Lieutenant Dan, he has a pretty incredible story. You know, you'd consider him a special needs dog, and when he was a baby, it was recommended he be euthanized because he might never be able to walk again. And I know he was a huge inspiration in your professional life. So tell us a little bit about him and the influence that he had on you.
Yeah, he's our second dog, but he's like the famous one. But big shout out to Sarah Lauch and Wolfgang Rescue and
Yes,
Erin Kowalski with the Bialis Wellness Foundation.
they're all
But
great.
Lieutenant Dan, yeah, it's amazing. But Lieutenant Dan, when he was born, he couldn't use his back legs at all, and he was from a breeder in Milwaukee, and Wolfgang Rescue through some of the connections over there pulled him when he was about 6 weeks old because he was taken to a vet clinic pretty much to be euthanized because he couldn't get around, and Wolfgang Rescue pulled him, and from what I understand from the story is that they knew Sarah Lauch and they asked Sarah, do you know anyone who can help with this dog? It's a special needs dog. We're not sure what to do. And then Sarah connected with Erin, who of course has tons of experience in that department dealing with special needs
Mm-hmm.
pet. And Sarah drove to Milwaukee to pick up Lieutenant Dan and drove him back to Chicago. And he was fostered by Erin, and he started through the sponsorship with the Bialis Wellness Foundation. He started doing rehab, when he was just about like 10, 12 weeks old. And I think that was probably one of the main reasons why he's doing well today is because he started very young, a very intensive rehab program. And he still has a little bit of like a wonky gait. It's not a normal gait, but he can get around pretty fine. We go on daily walks and he does okay. He just can't jump up into the furniture, for example. So we have to kind of like prop him up into the sofa. But he kind of like, as most pity mixes, he kind of like grumbles when he wants something. So he'll start grumbling, and kind of like that's when we know that hey, he wants up, or he wants the blanket to be cover him, or whatever it may be.
Oh, those pitties.
Yeah, but then he was being fostered by Erin, and then I think he started being fostered by her somewhat around November of 2016 or 15. Now I can't remember actually from the top of my head, but it was around November, and actually it was 15. Yeah, a couple months later, some point in January, Erin was going to be out of town, and let me clarify that at that point I didn't have my own business, the Canine PT. I was working at another canine rehab clinic here in Chicago, and Erin was one of my coworkers over there. And me and my wife volunteered. He was like, "Hey, Erin, we can watch Dan for a week if you want to, and not knowing how that was going to go because Ringo, our sheepdog, can be a little bit picky about other dogs. But Lieutenant Dan came in. Ringo did okay with him, and we just cuddled with Lieutenant Dan like that whole weekend, and the whole week, it was just like awesome to have him around. And we told Erin like right away, like, hey, we're gonna adopt him.
That's the end of that. Yeah, he's never leaving. That's funny.
So then he was about 5 months old, I think, when he moved in with us. Yeah.
And what a perfect fit to then live with you. That's amazing. To kind of wrap up, everything we've talked about, and I know you see a lot of different senior dogs, young dogs, adult dogs, your own dog in your daily work and the practice you have with the Canine PT. What do you think makes a happy dog?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think a happy dog is a dog that is doing the things that they want to be doing. And what I mean by that is that if your dog enjoys going on long walks on a weekend, then a happy dog in that case is the dog that is able to do that. If your dog that's more of a couch potato but needs to be able to get around the home and just go on short walks during the day, then that's a happy dog, because that's actually Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan is like that. He goes on a walk in the morning and then he sleeps for about 16 hours a day. So, and he's happy that way. He thrives actually in that routine. And whenever we actually take him out of that routine, whenever he travels with us somewhere, or we have to take him to a different place, he actually gets anxious, so you can tell he's not happy at that point. So for him, the routine of just going on the walk in the morning and just kind of like lunging around the rest of the day, he's happy with that, and that's what I think makes a dog happy, is for them to be able to do the things that they enjoy doing.
Yeah, I love that. Because I often, like you volunteer in rescue, and I've worked in rescue for over 10 years now, and one of the biggest things that I always struggled with was seeing people who had ridiculous expectations of their dogs. Like, why can't I take my dog to the mall or do this or that? He doesn't like it, too anxious. I need training, I need this. And it's like, this dog isn't built that way. Like we as humans, you can't force someone with social anxiety to go out in a crowd of 500 people and do a speech, like it takes time. They might not like it. It just might not make them happy. And so I love that answer. And I think that you're so right. And I think that your dogs are lucky to have you, definitely. And your clients too, to be able to educate them.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah. The dogs are pretty lucky to have me, but I think I'm pretty lucky to have them here.
Yes, we pet parents always tend to say that, isn't that right? But
Yeah. Yes.
well, thank you so much, Francisco, for all the work you're doing to improve the lives of dogs and pet parents. And just because also listeners are not in Chicagoland, if you don't live in this area, that doesn't mean that you and your dog cannot benefit from the Canine PT, because Francisco has online resources and courses available to pet parents all over. So, how can people find you? Tell us your website, social media, all that.
Yeah. So we are the Canine PT, pretty much all over social media. So our website is thecaninepT.com, and our Facebook page and Instagram is all the Canine PT.
And that's the letter
Um,
K and the number 9, and then the letters
that's
PT.
the Yeah, that's THEK number letter K number 9PT. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm sure you put in the show
I
notes and
will. Yep.
everything.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because it can get, yeah, I guess when I'm talking, just speaking out loud, it can get a little confusing, but it's just the letters out. But, yeah, like you said, I do a lot of educational stuff. So even if you're not in Chicago, that's, where I see my patients one on one, it's in the Chicago and some of the nearby suburbs by going to their houses, right? I have a mobile business. Um, you can also follow, because we do a lot of the blogs, we do a lot of the lives and social media with educational components. And then most recently, a couple months ago, we released an all online course where I teach people how to massage their pets at home, how to stretch and how to strengthen them to keep them healthy, to keep them happy, right? So there you go, to keep them healthy,
Exactly.
to keep them happy. And that's, and the reason why I created that course was, someone came with the idea to me of doing a workshop here in Chicago to, on that same topic. And I was going to do that, but, me not having my own facility at this point and being mobile, I was having a hard time,
Hmm.
picking, a facility that I could rent it out. It was going to get expensive. And then I started playing with the idea of kind of like, how about I make this online? And then not only I don't have to worry about the logistics of getting a facility or everything, but also it allows me to reach a lot more people, because now people from all over the United States and even overseas have bought the course. So
That's awesome.
it's been really great to be able to give that to them.
Good. That's awesome. And so I will link all that up in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for giving us your time and your insight. And it's fabulous information. So I hope that all you pet parents out there can benefit from it. We will see you next time on the Happy Dog Podcast.